to have us put in some more wells to compensate in years like this. It might not make sense in other areas where groundwater is already depleted, or
I'm talking more about integrated programs that can, collectively help us to do a better job managing what little we have. So other than IRWM and groundwater monitoring, are you aware of any other programs that we should be looking at that are at risk?
well, the one I mentioned at the end, the regional effort led by the Northern California Water Association, we're doing a lot of work, and we've gotten some funding from the state to help with it. But I know, the NACWA's the strength, like most associations, is based on the strength of its members. We're evaluating, just like we're evaluating the groundwater monitoring program, we're evaluating our memberships in organizations like this that are doing good work that should continue. So kind of, it's not an official program per se, but it's an initiative that's local that could be at risk.
Okay. And then a question for Kelly on the managed aquifer recharge. So it sounds like it has tremendous potential once it's fully
Once it's raining.
yeah, and you're at the early stages. So could you talk a little bit about what percentage you have underway right now, what the potential is, who the funding partners are for and your budget for, say, phase 1 as compared to, the entire package?
Okay, Lisa, shout out the answers to me. I'll do my best to represent it. Okay, yeah, it's in there. Okay, quick. So what I can say is we have one completed that we're monitoring. We have others in process right now on the ground that are not completed, and some in the wings. And the funding comes from multiple sources, including individuals and grant funding. Funding through that UCSC has accessed, and yeah, go for it. Shout it out.
Yeah, come on. Just remember to press the green button.
This is all about collaboration, right?
Yeah.
My name is Lisa Lurie. I'm with the Resource Conservation District of Santa Cruz County, partner very closely with Kelly and the rest of the folks in Pajaro Valley. With regards to the managed aquifer recharge, this was a very tight collaboration between the landowner, the grower, NRCS, the RCD, and our research partners. In addition to the recharge basin itself, it required some preliminary sediment retention and treatment, which was funded through an EQIP contract through NRCS. The Resource Conservation District provided expedited permitting and some funding assistance there. The landowner certainly contributed private investment and in-kind match through the setting aside of the site itself. And then the researchers at UCSC are the ones doing the monitoring. And to kind of add to the outcomes discussion, they do have equipment in place to be looking at how much recharge is happening. And based on that research, they can estimate that given a typical precipitation year, that basin should be recharging from 80 to 100 acre feet per year. So this is the first of what we're anticipating, 10 small-scale recharge basins to hopefully meet a 1,000 acre foot annual recharge.
Thank you.
Right. Thanks. Okay. I was going to say at the end that it's not mandatory to say something, but it's all been very helpful. Yeah.
I just had one question for Kelly. I'm Mark Bartz with the Department of Public Health. Can you tell us a little bit about your work on the nitrate problems in drinking water in your area and how that interties with all the work you're doing? It sounds like you're involved with addressing that.
Well, I can just speak to the fact that our farms are acting as pilots along with it's not just Driscoll's, there are other entities related. And we do see, obviously, a very good match between the quality and quantity issues. And so we are trying to address that and set up the growers to help manage the regulatory compliances as well. So trying to kill a few birds with one stone. So we're very connected with that. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. I have a couple of questions. I'm always thinking about people in the audience, but also people on the web who may not understand what we're talking about sometimes, but want to. When you talked about when you talked about water delivery systems needing modernization, there's the issue of the water system on the farm itself, but you were talking about the delivery system schedule. Can you just explain what that is for people who don't know what you were talking about?
Yeah, it's the way that water would get from, the mountain runoff down to wherever your farm is. So usually it's some sort of a canal or a pipe. And Tim could go on and on about it, I'm sure. But yeah, it's not so much how the water is being applied on the farm, but how it's getting from its source to where the farm is.
Right, but explain, you were talking about scheduled water versus other water. So if you can give a picture of what it is the state could actually do that might make that work better.
Yeah, so to upgrade the system to allow more precise, so a farmer can say, look at his crops he's growing, figure out what the requirements are at that stage of growth, and say, okay, it looks like read his soil moisture monitors, realize that, okay, it looks like I'm kind of low, looks like my crops need more than I have. I'll schedule an irrigation for tomorrow versus it's Tuesday, Tuesday's my water day, don't really know whether or not I need water today, but it's the day I'm getting my water, so okay.
Now, is that a result of the physical system or just the management system? I mean, I'm getting more granular. What would the change be? What would DWR have to do, for example? I'm sure the same may be true of the federal government. What would they have to do to be able to accommodate that farmer?
Well, to be able to have some sort of a more advanced technology within that canal or within that pipe to allow, you can't have a ditch tender in 20 different places at once going around and opening gates, and that gets too complicated. So you need some sort of a modernization.
So you need
computers.
automation.
Exactly.
Thanks. I just want to be clear that.
Unless Tim wants to add anything too, he's the engineer.
Good.
Because all of my friends in Australia are burying me with really great reports, but one of the things that I believe you're talking about is what Australia has done specifically as the result of their extended drought is they have made a huge investment, and I don't know if anybody has an idea of what the cost would be, but they have completely updated their delivery system. And I think that's probably what you're talking about.
Yes, and there are districts here in California that have upgraded at least parts of their system as well, using computers to open the gates, using automated controls within the canals, pressurizing it, allowing that low flow delivery. So it's not just Australia. There are districts here in California that are doing it too, but like you said, it takes a significant investment. Now the payoff can be huge, but it does take a lot of money to put that in place. There are some systems where you can do it piecemeal, sections of the canal at a time or sections of the irrigation district at a time, but yeah, it's a significant investment, and but payoff can be huge.
Right, and I suspect it varies by crop type too in terms of how important it can be that's fascinating and great. And it's sort of the flip side of the telemetry at the local level with all your real crop circles on the match. And one of the things that has impressed me, having not spent as much time with ag for a number of years before I came back to this, is how often I've been going out in the field and there's somebody with an iPad or another kind of tablet, whatever their favorite is, and they're showing me the graphs, and they can water the field from the house or whatever, and that's allowing them the precision. So the application of technology, which is the application of money, and ingenuity is something I think that has the potential to revolutionize what we can do, not just the drip tape, which is, I think is something that people who are not as familiar with modern day situation in agriculture in California or anywhere else don't realize. And so it's a technology that people are hungry for, either themselves on farm or for the state to be able to have, or whoever their water district is to be able to have, that there is a place, if we could find the money, where the application of money could yield real water savings in a much more sophisticated way than we normally think about water conservation. It's about precision. It's not about sacrifice necessarily. And I think that's just a very important concept, which leads to my other question, and one I perhaps should know the answer to, and I'm curious. You were talking about how in California, and I've seen the charts, are still more than 1/2 gravity fed, which means in many cases flood irrigation as opposed to the more precision irrigation. Now again, certain crops are different. They have different soils underneath. In ag, part of the the challenge is that one person's waste is another person's groundwater recharge, or another person's refuge water, or another person. So again, agriculture is very, very different from when we think about us all putting low-flow toilets in our houses. And so urban, or stopping to put half of the water in urban California into outdoor landscaping that we just look at. So we have a ways to go still in urban, and I'm sure we'll be hearing about that a little bit later this morning. But I was curious about how you said that less than 20% in Nebraska is gravity fed, and less than, was it 5 or 15% in Kansas?
7.
7. So I knew it was low, but my brain went on a blank there. Can you just talk a little bit more about that, or Karen, or anyone?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
I'm sorry, being so dependent, just having come from the home of the greatest aquifer.
Yes.
They're so dependent on groundwater, and that's a significant difference from our surface water system as very sophisticated, but I think it's rather unique.
Yeah, I think that's probably the main driver. When you're on groundwater, you just turn on the pump whenever you want to, so you can decide what type of irrigation system you have and fit your water delivery to match that. Here in California, we have more of a challenge, but I think we're up to that challenge, and we've seen districts that are up to that challenge. The challenge is that instead of just simply turning on a pump whenever we want to, we have to move our water around to get it to where we want it to be. It's not, in a lot of cases, it's not right beneath us, and in a lot of cases, it's not beneficial to just turn on that pump from the groundwater. But again, we've seen that these types of systems can work in California and other places like Australia. And so it's just a matter of, again, making our the technology of our delivery systems match the technology that we have on field.
That's great. So there's a linkage between those two issues that folks need to understand. It's not simple, but that there's a way we could go if we take a more sophisticated view of water delivery systems in general that would enable more use of these other systems.
Yes.
That's great. Thank you.
I think that is a good discussion, but and it does speak though how California is different insofar as we have topography, and we get the snowpack based evolution of our water supply and use, and yet you point out a subtlety that it isn't that we have to match Kansas in terms of meeting the 7%. That's not the issue, but the issue is half of it is gravity, and there's probably a lot of opportunity to right fit the system and say, we did it gravity, that was great, it was elegant, because I'm a civil engineer, and a gravity system is the highest form.
Hey, as a sewer system operator, I know that gravity works.
Actually, gravity's the law.
That's right.
Right, gravity is
So,
the law.
we're not going to say gravity-based is bad necessarily, but it can help us be more precise in our application if we have a non-gravity system in certain applications.
Right, and
Very helpful.
even gravity systems can be benefited by irrigation scheduling, which a lot of the time is not available to farmers right now.
I thought that was a great point, too.
Yeah.
If I may, it's really not an either-or situation. With modernization of gravity is a wonderful thing in terms of energy consumption or lack of consumption, the energy cycle. But as Claire was saying, you can modernize the system, and that's what the water use efficiency grant I alluded to, and provide the farmers what the word that we like to use is flexibility. The farmers want water when they want it. When you get up in the morning and take a shower, you don't like calling City Hall and saying I'd like 10 minutes of water. And that's called a demand system. You get the water on demand. A scheduled system that Claire talked about is where you got to call. There's different types of scheduled systems where your water comes every Tuesday, or the type that we've got, which is more common with irrigation districts, is where you call and you have by 11 o'clock in the morning and your water is available the next day by 12 or something like that, but modified schedule. But the point is that it's not an either-or situation. If you can keep the main system gravity, it saves you a lot of energy, climate impacts and things of that nature. But what we're striving to do is exactly what Claire said, which is provide our farmers, who ultimately that's what we're in business for, is to help them maximize their crop production and all that. They've embraced the drip irrigation, the scheduling on the micro feeding the crops on a micro daily basis versus a slug of water every so often. So anyway, the two go hand in hand.
Great.
And I would just say this is probably the subject of an entire day's workshop. I think there are a lot of improvements on the ground, and it's really, as you say, it's not an either or. There's lots of shades of gray, and we could probably, as I said, have a whole day where we could find out what the needs are in terms of, financial, more research that I know CDFA and USDA are working on, and, maybe bring in some of the other ag groups that are, and water districts that are actually out on the ground working on these improvements.
That's great. Well, thank you. That was great. Thank you for the questions and enlightenment and all of that. We'll now take a 15-minute break, and then we'll go on to our next two fine panels.
Can you? Yeah. Did I give you my card? Yeah. Yeah, do that.
Will be. Janine? Thanks. Yeah, it was. But my take home is gravity is the law. Well, I like it with Judge Dredd intonation. It's really good. Well, also just more fun. Okay, good. Good. Okay. Are we ready? No. No, I'm on. I'm not on. All right, thank you. We are reconvening. Yeah, that was terrific. Thank you all very much for the morning. That was really good and some great, really great insights. Thank you very much. More sophisticated conversation than we're used to out in the public discourse. So I really do appreciate the panelists, both on the dais and on the panel tables. We're now going to move to the Small Community Rural Water Measures panel. Thank you all for coming, and in the interest of not being as cruel and scary as I was the first time, you're each going to get your own 7 minutes. It was kind of a fun concept, but actually the time we spent, I think, was time extremely well spent. And so thank you very much for that. And so I think, Ms. Waddell, you're up first in the order. We have the USDA Rural Development, then the California Rural Water Association, and then the Community Water Center. Thank you all for joining us. And again, please reintroduce yourself and your title before you speak.
All right. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Janice Waddell. I'm the Director of Community Programs for USDA Rural Development for the state of California. We have a really great working relationship with your Division of Financial Assistance. We've worked closely with them on the Small Community Grant Program and the SRF program. Yes, over the years. Yeah. All right.
Rockstar thing.
I administer the Water and Waste Disposal Loan and Grant Program, as well as the Emergency Community Water Assistance Grant Program. These programs serve communities up to 10,000 in population. Under our Emergency Grant Program, we can provide up to 100% financing, grant financing, up to $500,000 to communities that are experiencing a decline in the quantity or quality of their drinking water. The funds can be used for purposes like connecting to a nearby system, drilling a well, providing temporary water sources for up to 120 days. One of the things that we are unable to finance under this program is the replacement of leaky pipes that could help conserve water within the system. The rural communities that we're working with have taken steps, like everyone else in California, to conserve water, either through mandatory or voluntary restrictions in their communities. And I think one of the important things that they're trying to do is really educate their populace on their community's water situation and just work on a one-to-one basis with the members of their community so that they all understand the importance of conserving water, fixing leaks, that type of thing.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I know we've talked a lot, and certainly in the administration, the governor's budget proposal, a recognition that leaky pipes can account for, I mean, it depends on how leaky they are, but an average of 20% or more water loss, so it's not insignificant. Is that what you're finding out in rural, or is it higher or lower than in urban?
You know, those are kind of, it just depends on the system. And some of them have been, that we've dealt with, have been as high as 30% of their water loss. Several of the communities that we've talked to, because we're getting a lot of calls from the small rural communities, quite a number of them are looking at trying to replace their leaky pipes. And several of them have told us if they're able to do that, they'll have enough water to get through the system. They've just been losing so much, and, you know, they haven't been, it hasn't been, they haven't had a financial incentive, I guess, up until this point, you know, to deal with it, or been able to deal with it financially. One of the negative impacts, and it was talked about in the earlier panel, of the implementation of conservation is a reduction in revenue to these small water systems. Most of them have already implemented, conservation-type rate structure. Most of them or many of them are already metered throughout the community. But they're all operating on a very tight cash flow situation. And with water conservation measures, that's going to significantly reduce the amount of available revenue to those communities. And that's going to be, made worse by the fact that some of these communities are going to be experiencing between 50 and 75% unemployment, which is going to make it extremely difficult for anybody to pay their water bill anyway. But so we expect that that will be, one of the significant impacts in the small rural communities that we work with. Another barrier to the use of recycled water in the communities we work in, and I think you all are working to address some of these issues, but it's the high cost and the time-consuming nature of getting approval to use recycled water. For a lot of rural communities, that's just a barrier for them to do it. They're just barely able to make their mandatory improvements to their systems, and making those types of improvements are just cost prohibitive. And they just don't have the resources available to go through the process to get permitted to do that.
So it's the time and the money for the process in addition to the financing for the project itself.
Yes, that's exactly right. Let's see. So some of the funding that would really help small rural communities, again, replacing leaky pipes, we think that can be a big, can contribute significantly to a reduction in water use in these small communities and help some of them to meet their water needs. Again, the studies for the recycled water permitting process, if there could be assistance with that, that could help these rural communities implement them. Funding for programs, a lot of cities are able to, incentivize the replacement of showers, faucets, that type of thing, but in the low-income communities that we're working with, they don't have the money, and the residents don't have the funds to go in and replace those things, so any funding available to assist with that. And then the other thing is, with conservation, there's going to be a reduction, inflow to wastewater treatment plants. That's going to, again, cause a reduction in revenue on the sewer side also. And to help offset some of that, any energy efficiency funding that might be available to help the systems implement energy efficiency improvements will reduce their operating expenses, and that will help these small communities remain sustainable in the long term. Again, most of them are operating pretty much on break even, and unfortunately, I mean, there's absolutely no way in these communities you're going to get through a Prop 218 process at this time to implement your rate increases. So any assistance to help them reduce their operating expenses would help them be more sustainable.
Thank you for that, your succinctness and your specific recommendations. Appreciate that quite a bit. Mr. DeMoss.
Yeah, my name is Dan DeMoss. I'm with California Rural Water Association. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Just very quickly about the Rural Water Association. We're a technical assistance and training organization. It's also a membership organization. So we have roughly 1,200 utility members across the state. We have multiple technical assistance and training programs funded by EPA, USDA. We have a program with CDPH on the drinking water side and the SRF program. Association's been around since about 1990. I want to get specifically, we were emailed some specific questions, and I want to kind of incorporate those and get to that. But I want the viewpoint of my viewpoint is going to be from the rural communities that we work with. My own experience is growing up in a small town of 1,500 people, public works director in that same town, as well as water and wastewater operator, and then into the rural water world as a circuit rider, an EPA training and technical assistance specialist, and then somebody got wise and made me executive director a number of years ago. So I have a fairly, I think, balanced viewpoint from the ground up with rural communities. And I'm going to echo some of the things that Janice said, as well as Ann earlier in the other panel. I heard the term political will, and that is a real problem at the rural community level. We can identify and prioritize and meet about these issues, but where the rubber meets the road, it's political will. If you have a board or a council that is willing to go through the Prop 218 process, we recently completed one with a board in about 65 days. It is doable, but it's very, very difficult. We are seeing water bills in rural communities topping $135, $150 a month. Okay, that's just the water bill. That's not the water and the sewer bill. All right. One of the questions I got that we looked at was what immediate actions have small and rural communities taken to reduce water use? All of them, again, across the board, Echo Janice, are doing their best. A lot of the ones we see do not have drought or water conservation rate structures in place. A lot of them will have a tier rate structure, which is, again, one of those things that's always recommended. And so they're in a rock and a hard spot. If they're a groundwater system, and you have to look at both, whether they're groundwater or source water. You can't lump them all together because we have folks in the Central Valley that are getting zero allotment or 50% reduction. And some of those surface water systems have wells. Those wells don't have the water quality that they need to have. So I think some of what I've seen here is what can we do to help. I think that if there's a way that the board and the health division can get together and look at some specific issues where their water quantity and quality are in place. So in other words,
Correct.
they have a well, it is a good producer, but it's got arsenic or it's got nitrates. Is there some way that you all can expedite the process?
For the treatment system, yeah. I was
Get a treatment
just up in Willits.
Yeah,
Day before yesterday.
It is a long process, and there's engineering involved, and there's money up front involved, and those are all the hurdles, and we've discussed that in various panels all over. So what are they doing? They're doing a lot of little things. We've got a lot of water systems that we're training right now on how to sound a well, and what I mean by that is measure static levels. Right now, we tend to be focused on the surface water issues. We see a lot of pictures of the reservoirs, Folsom Lake, and that kind of stuff. I don't really have a good handle on what's going to happen if this continues with our groundwater supplies. But there is really no requirement for a groundwater system to measure static water levels. And we have a lot of the rural communities that don't. Now, any wells that have been drilled or built in the last, I don't know, probably 20 years since the new well construction standards will have a tube. They can sound them. But if they're 50, 60, 70 years old, there's no way to do that. Not without pulling the well, looking at it. So even getting something simple as static water levels is a challenge. You want to take those so you can monitor if those well levels start to drop. So we're working with rural communities who are asking those kind of boots on the ground questions. What can we do? And it's really important. The chairwoman mentioned leak detection and water loss. We see it as high as 60%. Okay, if you get a facility, especially down south where the tremors and earthquakes are a little more apt to happen, I won't say it's common. 20 to 30% is common. 10% is what the state considers acceptable. It used to be 15% up until a few years ago. And so water accountability is a big thing that we're working with them right now. Along with that comes simple things like meter calibration, master meter calibration. Do they have a master meter? Are they going off an old formula to figure out the number of hours that the pump cycled, and they come up with a ballpark figure of what they produce that way? Many of them do. Another question we got is, what are the economic impacts? We're talking a lot about water quantity, the amount of water. I'm worried about water quality. As water levels in wells start to drop, what does that do depending on how that well was built? If it's built to current standards, theoretically, we're supposed to have a sealed casing down a certain, but if it's not, what's that going to bring in? If we've got a ton of systems on the level, meaning they're just below the 10 parts for arsenic, okay, what is going to happen when these water levels start to drop? Who's going to come out of compliance? There's a lot of other issues, and the hurdles are all the same. It's about money. It's about resources. What do they have to do? The association is working as much as we can. But again, that political will with these rural communities, giving them the resources. The Prop 218 process is doable, but it's usually not politically acceptable. And we have many cases where they start to get into it, there's an upheaval, people get recalled, Recently, a year and a half ago, I attended a small town city council meeting in Northern California where 2 city councilmen have been recalled. The 2 that replaced them ran on getting replaced on repealing the rates. And this is also a system who's been under compliance orders for over 10 years. And so there's a lot of issues, I think, out there that we can work on. I don't know immediately, but the drought situation, we've also got to consider the water quality aspects and what we can do. So, again, it comes down to money. If the state board can, and working with CDPH, can look at a way to expedite these issues, you're going to have to prioritize who's running out of water, who's not. What are the water quality issues? It's not acceptable for anybody to drink below standard water quality. That's not what I'm asking. And the Rural Water Association would love to meet with you and talk about some of these issues.
Great.
I'm done.
Thank you very much. Perfect timing, too. You get a prize of some sort. It's really good. Thank you very much. Mr. Carrillo.
All right, it's still morning. Good morning, Omar Carrillo, Community Water Center. We are a Central Valley-based organization that works with small communities, many of which struggle to secure access to basic water needs, resources, drinking water, wastewater. And we appreciate the opportunity to be here. And, you know, we're here as a resource, and I'll keep my comments brief, but I'll describe some of the things that we've experienced since this drought began, and also weave in some of the realities of these communities, many of which actually haven't had drinking water even when there wasn't a drought. So that being said, there's some kind of basics. You know, we have 2,100 community water systems that are 100% reliant on groundwater, 420 schools who are not connected to community water systems that rely on their own well for community water supply. So as the issues get worse, these communities have a more difficult time, and also schools. But what I wanted to spend some time on is just describing some of the interactions we've had with communities, and also provide some specifics as to what can be done, ideas. So we've had, for instance, we had a meeting just recently. Every month we meet with communities, 20+ communities, with Agua. It's the Asociación de Gente Unida por Agua. So it's 20+ communities. We had a woman, Maria, come to the meeting and say, I haven't had water in 2 months. She's a private well owner. She's a private homeowner. She's on a private well, and it's near Seville. She hasn't had water in 2 months, and she's elderly, and she's saying, what do I do? How can I help? So we provided some basic resources for people to call at the county, but the truth of the matter is that the costs associated, she had already done an assessment on what the cost would be to address her well issues, and it was $20,000. It's well above what was available, and there's not too much available. So I wanted to, so there wasn't much we can do for her, but at the same time, we provided her some guidance. So that's a very specific example. We've had communication with communities in Orange Center, which is near Fresno, and their wells have gone dry. I know it's a community that just meets the threshold above being, it could be a public water system. It's not a legal entity yet, but it's 16 connections, and so their water has run out. And once again, they're in a dire situation, and they've been out of water for some time now. So the community and the school has already applied for funding to connect the community to the city of Fresno. And so they're just kind of waiting for this process to take place. And actually, we were just talking about what's happening in between right now. I know at the Fresno, there's some other issues going on, but the point being is they're out of water. Let me see. Oh, one other example, you know, outside of the city of Madera, there was a situation where once again, a private well owner, and there's this individual has experienced a situation where she's reached out to see what sort of resources are available. So private well owner, private home, and the costs associated with addressing her issues are over $100,000. I mean, it's ridiculous. So the most that can happen, and the majority of assistance that can be provided to her would be about $20,000. If certain, you know, resources are pulled together, federal resources, local loans, and so on and so forth, So once again, the individuals that are under 15 connections and private well owners are in a difficult situation. So I spoke a lot about private well owners because that's a lot of the communication we begin recently, but we also will say that as this drought worsens, and aquifers, we continue to deplete our water, the water gets worse. We know that. And so the communities that right now have already suffered with nitrates in their water, they haven't had clean water, there's going to be other stuff in there, arsenic, higher concentrations of all sorts of pollutants and contamination. So there has to definitely be a system that identifies and works with these communities to make sure that they're getting not only the targeted resources for their water infrastructure and wastewater, the infrastructure. We talked about leakage earlier and what that means, but also for them to get some basic information on what sorts of resources are going to be available. If the conversation's over this specific bill, I know there's a lot going on. Even today, the bill was introduced, the drought bill. There has to be a way of getting that information and to the community if and when this funding becomes available. And I'll mention two specific things, and then I'll leave it at that. There was a fairly successful, well, we have yet to see the success, but there was a pre-planning funding that was made available through CDPH that allowed for communities to work together to form legal entities. And what we understand, it was a small pot of money, and it was actually grown. So it was like 1.4 million. It grew to like double that size. The need is large. So what it allows for is small communities, including private well owners, those that are not meeting the public system standard, to work together to form and become a legal entity, and therefore be able to solicit SRF funding and other sorts of state and federal funding. So that's something that we have yet to see if it's working really well, but we know that there was a lot of interest, and there's twice as much as funding that was actually made available, and I think that the funding was made available. So actually, I'll tell you, it was made available, and so that's something that's good. And then also, I'll leave it with economies of scale. So it's kind of to the same point. We believe that in moving forward, there has to be an ability to have a more comprehensive approach to helping communities, large and small, consolidate in a way that's appropriate and reflective of the needs, and doesn't really kind of mess up the power dynamics, but helps communities. So one of the things that we've communicated even to the administration and the board in the past is having some sort of department of consolidation and having a very specific approach, staff allocations and funding and resources, because I know that that's been an effort that hasn't been, I know CDPH has worked towards having, they've done like 100 consolidations in 10 years, the merits of which I don't know how that, I know how it works, but what I can tell you is that we can probably do better, and there's a lot of communities that would probably jump at that opportunity to work with folks. So with that, thank you for this opportunity, and I'm here for questions. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Thank you very much. You've highlighted some issues that are essential in the long-term planning for communities, and there are a lot of public policy choices that the legislature is going to need to make on this as well, but you've also highlighted things in the short run. I would say I also know, and Mark, perhaps you can illuminate, I don't know, but a lot of the issue of the immediate water shortages, particularly for the small communities where there's going to be a need to get them bottled water, and water trucks coming, is being handled through the emergency services operation that fans out from the community emergency coordinator, not necessarily the emergency water district. Hopefully they're working together up through OES, and I don't know all the details of how that delivery system is going to work, but I know CDPH has been advising.
I can talk about that a little bit. This is Mark Bartson with the Department of Public Health. On the emergency water supplies, the funding we have available now is mainly aimed at communities that have a water quality problem where people need bottled water because there's no treatment. And then expanding into this area of addressing the amount of water that would be needed because of a water shortage, we're talking much bigger pots of money than the 50,000 we're talking about. So we're looking at that, but that's addressing a drought where they just don't have enough water, and hauling water or something like that is a whole another realm that we're looking at. But our program right now is for the ones that have a quality problem and need hauled water, bottled water, or in some cases possibly local treatment, like a vending machine. We're looking at that.
What I wanted to mention is that on the emergency funding, we're familiar with that funding but what I can tell you is not too many communities are taking advantage of it for two reasons. First of all, I think we have to do a little bit better at outreaching to communities to let them know that they qualify. Secondarily, that funding is not only for bottled water, but there's interim solutions. So like you take vending machines and POU systems. In some of these communities, the threshold of 50,000, I mean, they're not able to effectively address their issue, even on an interim basis, with that 50,000 cap. So in these communities, 75, there's been a financial analysis, it's 75 or 100,000. So it's an emergency need, it's still an interim solution, but that cap is also an issue.
Right, and we're working on raising that cap. If we're able to do that, that'll really help. Yeah, it's not
Great.
enough for a community with, let's say, 150 connections. $50,000 just doesn't go very far.
Yeah, you're also making me realize we probably should have asked OES to join us on the dais. So let's have a conversation at the next break so I can make that connection happen. Okay, thank you.
One thing
Questions
I-
for the excellent panel?
One thing I wanted to mention is I believe in the drought legislation, there was at least some consideration of cap and trade funding being made available for leaky pipes. It's going to the Department of Water Resources. And so, Diana, do you know anything more about how that might be handled? If it actually gets in and gets adopted?
We don't have details yet, but we are definitely heard the same thing and would be working both with our water use efficiency branch and the integrated regional water management group to get that funding out.
Right, and on the leaky pipe issue, and I know I've asked this question before, but I'm not sure I'm right on the answer, so it'd probably be helpful to ask it. We can use, on the wastewater side, we can give SRF loans for collection system pipes, but under the drinking water SRF, can you also give it for leaky pipes, or does that not make the prioritization because you have so much of a backlog on treatment systems first?
Typically, we haven't gotten down to that point on the priority list, but we are looking at that more closely and hope to address some of those that are where it's creating a real quality problem.
Okay, other questions?
Yeah, I'd just like to point out.
Oh,
you know,
wait, can I do something? I totally forgot. My apologies. We now have, as our USDA representative, Lawada Kiger, who is a long-time, I want to say, fixture hero, mainstay, I don't know what word you want to use, over the past couple of decades for USDA in water issues in California. And I'm delighted to have you here, but also want to thank you for being that steady presence over so many issues over so many years.
Happy to be here and happy to serve in California. And I did want to address a question Tim had. We had mentioned that with the Bureau of Reclamation, we have a joint program. We could do the same thing with the Department of Water Resources. And what we're doing with Reclamation is they put out funding to irrigation water districts where they can improve their delivery system. Example I'll use is South San Joaquin Irrigation District. They applied and received funding. They've converted from an open gravity flow system to a 19-mile pressurized pipe. And then we assisted the farmers to switch from their flood irrigation to pressurized systems. We're in the third year of that project. I talked to the district manager, and he said this last summer, the farmers had a 30% increase in yield, and they had an overall 30% reduction in water use.
That's great.
So, you know, these are, if we can partner together, these work very well.
Oh, yeah, that's good to introduce Luana. I just wanted to point out a theme I was hearing from the panel, you know, in terms of all of the different funding needs and the fact that the revenue generating system hasn't necessarily caught up with the complexity of the water management issues, especially in rural areas. It takes resources to build up the institutional infrastructure, as you pointed out. And so I can't help but point out a possible unintended consequence of dealing with leaky pipes would be to reduce revenue. And do you have any comments about, you know, if we come in with assistance to fix leaky pipes, do you need also assistance to update your authority, your rate structure? You know, because if you get rid of leaky pipes, you're gonna have less water you're getting money for.
Is that really?
Or you know, it's
Well,
an unintended consequence that may be major or minor. But I just point that out, that, you know, if you don't have your rate structure fit correctly to cover fixed costs in your system,
Right.
you will have a losing game over time.
All right, help me understand that, because it seems if you fix the pipes going somewhere, they'd get more water. No? Or they'd get the same amount and you'd have more to go around.
Well, it's a balance. It's also going to depend on where the leaks are at. If the leak's in the distribution system before it reaches the meter, then it's just a straight up loss to the